Hearing none, we do have a slip from the President of the Corrections Officers Benevolent Association, Brian Sullivan. I almost did it again, Brian.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Brian Sullivan, President, Nassau County Correctional Officers Benevolent Association. I appreciate the time to speak a little bit here. I'm going to reiterate a couple of things you've already spoken about. Maybe I can shed a little bit of light on some of it, but see things from the union's perspective. I prepared a statement. As I have stated here on numerous occasions, corrections is a far different bird in the criminal justice system. Our job is different, our needs are different, particularly since we're hidden from the purview of the public. Our issues are usually only publicized by groups or people with agendas, such as a lot of today's reformers who have never stepped inside a correctional facility but have no problem telling us how we should run them. This year is obviously different from the COVID pandemic. Bail reform, discovery reform, budgets and philosophies are all being geared around all of this stuff that's going on. Issues that continue unabated at our facility include and are topped with what I talk about every time I come here is staffing, staffing, staffing. Staffing is the number one issue. I've been here at this podium countless times over the past couple of years, and staffing is the number one priority. For informational purposes, since January of 2018, we've hired 131 correction officers. In that same time period, we lost 191 correction officers. That equates to a net loss of 60 officers in just the last 3 years. When I bring this up many times to those in the county, I'm met with the same reaction that staffing is still an issue there. Didn't we just hire a class of 45 officers this year? Yes, that's great, but we're not keeping up with attrition, resignation, losses to other jobs, and unfortunately a few deaths here and there, God forbid. In a little more detail, in 2018 we hired 57 officers and lost 46. In 2019, we hired 23 and lost 42. In 2020, the year of COVID, we hired 0 and lost 68. In 2021, to date, we've hired 48, lost a few of those already new hires to other jobs, etc. But all told to date, aside from those new hires, we've lost 35 so far this year. When normal retirements occur here, a lot of people leave in December. December, we're going to end up losing several more. To date, we've lost 35. We're going to lose a lot more, and we've only hired 48 this year. We definitely have a staffing problem in this department, as the sheriff reiterated before. We had a staffing problem this time last year. We had a staffing problem this time 2 years ago. Our officers many times are forced to work mandated overtime. It's an ongoing issue that never seems to get resolved here. We have retention problems, and certainly we have recruitment problems. This rolls over also not just into correction officers, it reverberates through the ranks as we go up to the top. A lot of people that are retiring are senior people, senior correction officers. There's also a lot of supervisors that retire over these years, and because we don't have the proper hiring, we're not able to make the proper promotions. So all through the ranks, we have deficits in corporals, sergeants, lieutenants, captains, just as we do with correction officers. We have retention problems, certainly have recruitment problems. We're nowhere near what's going on with our counterparts in New York City corrections, but we have to address these issues so we don't go further down the rabbit hole. Yes, our department has shrunk, due to the insanity of bail reform that we all continue to grapple with at all levels of government and law enforcement. Currently, in our present state, we calculate that we should have over 800 officers here. Anywhere from 815 to 820 officers, including through the supervisory ranks. There is talk about what's going on with our new contract. Whenever that gets done, will that change staffing or hiring needs? Does that change payroll in particular? No. Either way, contract or no contract, obviously we need bodies. As of today, we have 117 COBA members with 25 years or more on our job. Once again, our retirement is based on a 25-year retirement. We have 117 people eligible to retire right now with the base 25 years in. So those people could go at any time at their option. We currently have 49 COBA members with 30 or more years on the job, and by mid-2023, we'll have an additional 23 that will hit their 30-year mark. This all has to be taken into account, much like it is in the police department, as I will outline, and I hope I don't get dirty looks from my friends in the police department next to me, but I have to make certain comparisons to what's done here, and we go through this every year. For comparison, I point to the public safety summary in the proposed budget, where it states clearly that for the dedicated and professional members of Nassau County law enforcement, the county has implemented a program of steady hiring to ensure the police department remains strong in anticipation of attrition through retirements. Under the police department, the proposed budget maintains a sworn headcount that includes additional classes to offset anticipated attrition, also increases their supervisory headcount. For the Sheriff's Department, the budget funds 2 classes up to 40 correction officers. When I first saw that, I had high hopes that it was 2 classes of 40 each for 80 officers. Apparently it's 2 classes totaling 40. That's not enough. In the budget, it also says while the inmate population is decreasing, hiring is needed to simply keep pace with attrition. For the police department, the language is the budget maintains a sworn headcount with classes to offset attrition. For us, its hiring is needed to keep pace with attrition. There's a lot of fungibility in those words. There are 2 things to be sure of here. We have not kept up with attrition here over the last several years, as I've stated those numbers. And also, the inmate population is not decreasing, as is stated in the budget. It is increasing. Under bail reform, we went from just under 1,100 inmates to 800. When COVID, at the height of it, we dipped to an all-time low of 550 inmates. We're now over 800 again, and this is before the full opening of courts and adjudication of long outstanding court cases. Our inmate population is most assuredly expected to increase. With that in mind, the approved headcount for COBA for the 2021 budget was 775. The actual onboard headcount was 745, and that was only after the hiring of these 2 classes, but not reflective of the few that left. The 2022 proposed headcount is 783, an increase of 8 over last year's proposal that wasn't met then, and is most assuredly still not enough now. As outlined in the budget for the police department, their NIFA approved number, this is for officers only, obviously, because it's not the full thing, was 1,775. Their actual onboard was 1,827 in the budget, 52 more than the approved number. The 2022 proposal is for 1,780. So I have to ask again, how is that so easily done or better done with the police department, and we continually deal with the disparity with our department? On to a couple of other things. Training has changed here somewhat, thankfully under the new sheriff, with the addition of several specialized training regimens that were implemented, including a mandated 8-hour block of mental health training. But overall, our training regimen continues to remain severely lacking when compared to other municipalities with corrections where a 40-hour yearly training regimen is the norm. This applies particularly in our supervisory ranks, where training is almost non-existent and has been for years. This is a holdover from previous administrations and needs to be seriously addressed. In the end, it all relates to liability on the part of the county. As I stated last year, this proposed budget under goals states that the department shall create policies and procedures designed to maintain officer safety, maintain or increase the current level of training in all those policies and procedures, and hold officers accountable for their understanding and implementation of them. To be clear, and once again for the record, our training issues here need to be seriously addressed, which goes hand in hand with our policies and procedures unit that was disbanded under former Sheriff Sposato and remains disbanded today, with the hopes of being restaffed under our new sheriff, but once again, we don't have enough staff. To be clear, we have reviews of our SOPs, etc., along with directives sent out to staff to review their SOPs and be familiar with them. But again, what exactly are our officers expected to understand and be held accountable with SOPs that haven't been updated in years, and if they're not going to be properly trained on an ongoing basis in them? As to other issues, next year, HALT legislation, H-A-L-T, which is Human Alternatives to Long-Term Incarceration, that was imposed by the state, will be put into place. This union, along with our downstate correction partners, where we represent over 40,000 correction officers in New York State, fought this legislation because it's dangerous. It will promote violence in our jails, and mostly importantly, for our purposes here today, is full of unfunded mandates where we will no longer be able to segregate violent predatory inmates from the general population. It's our job to protect the general population of inmates from violent predators inside, and that job was made almost impossible by the New York State Legislature and signed into law by the former governor. I'm not going to get into the specifics of HALT here. It's all about I always lose the thing about it's not isolated confinement, solitary confinement. I'm sorry, I had a little brain thing there. They talk about solitary confinement, try to make it look like it's Alcatraz. We have inmates, buried in holes underneath the jails. There's no such thing. We have administrative segregation that separates people with mental issues, people with protective custody, and violent predators in our jails and prisons. Under HALT, that's all gone away, and you just have to put people, you have to mix them together in things that are not funded, residential rehabilitation units. That all remains to be seen how that's going to come about. We'll no longer be able to segregate these violent predatory inmates from the general population. I won't get into the specifics. If anybody wants to talk about this as this thing goes into next year, I'll gladly give a tutorial or give any information for anybody on the legislature. I'll sit down with you and go over it. It's too long to go over for our purposes here. As for it being budget related, we in the unions have fought to have chapter amendments done to this law to roll back some of the HALT legislation provisions with the previous governor's council to make our jails safer. We were minimally successful, minimally being the operative word, but one amendment that was made to the state, by the state, and without our agreement, was to carve out mandated training, both in our academy classes and for yearly in-service training that was in the original law, but removed because of associated costs and expenses. So now we're stuck with HALT, its ramifications, its unfunded mandates on the counties, the carve-out of associated training, and most assuredly the civil liability to the county that they will now bear because of increased violence in the jails. It's just, we're living in the bizarro world in New York State right now. Under budget goals, funding for programs in the police department that have the very laudable goal of reducing crime and protecting the safety of the public are completely antithetical to correctional budget goals of simply reducing the cost of incarceration and overburdening an already overstressed probation system that is not fully equipped to monitor many times dangerous individuals released from custody. These budget theories should all work hand in hand, but they do not. How do you increase spending to enhance public safety initiatives on the front end of the criminal justice system while reducing everything on the back end? It doesn't make any sense. It flies directly in the face of logic since, for example, in our correctional facilities, we have always provided, many times under court order, drug, alcohol, and mental health treatment programs. I've spoken here before about sincerely hoping that the recent monies awarded to the county under the settlements of the opium lawsuits will be provided for programs and training in the Sheriff's Department where we deal with violent, many times mentally unstable, and drug-addicted individuals on a daily basis. As we see every year now, not just in Nassau County, but all over the state, the prioritized budget objective with corrections is to get people out of the system and back on the street as soon as possible under bail reform. This is not reform. It's all about an effort to cut the cost of incarceration, get people out of the system while providing no safety nets in the street, like drug programs, mental health treatment, for that offender, no public safety considerations with the simple release of people who need help in the first place, and absolutely no regard for the victims of crime, obviously, many times violent crime, who we all see as plain as day are completely left out of the conversation when it comes to criminal justice. There was a little bit of editorial there, and I apologize if I go on to it, but it is what it is. The main problem that we're here to talk about, that I'm here to talk about today, is the staffing. Staffing. We need bodies. The sheriff, I think he's a good man. He's got a lot of experience in corrections, over 30 years in corrections. He knows we need staffing. The county knows we need staffing. We need to get staffing in here. We've gone around, kind of danced around the subject a little bit here about how it is. We need to get bodies in. We need supervisors. We need staffing. We need staffing for all of our units, investigative units, internal criminal investigators, gang units, all of that stuff. And none of that happens unless we have staffing, and we're short. We're short by a good amount. We could probably use 100 new officers over here, and I'm not happy to see that there are only 40 budgeted for next year. That does not help. Thank you for your time.
Let's do the 40.
There's also one other thing that was in my mind. I'm sorry. You talked about raise the age before a couple of times. I made a note for myself. I just want to say for the record also that there is still litigation that should be taken into consideration about who does the transports of the adolescent offenders. The previous sheriff, before Sheriff Zarenda, gave that job to the deputies. Transportation of people that age were always under the purview of correction officers. We sued, we had arbitrations, we're still in appeals court right now, so I think that should be taken into consideration with regard to any potential staffing down the road also. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Brian. Thank you very much,
Thank
for
you,
the happy news that you just gave us.
Right.
But
I'm always here delivering happy news.
thank you. But I guess it's just based on reality, and and I do believe the sheriff has done a fairly good job, so far, and I think you do agree with us with the staffing, and I think in a perfect world, I'd love to say that if it was up to the sheriff and you can put your heads together, and the next thing you know, we'll end up having 120 new correctional officers in the jail. But I guess the question now remains, Sheriff, how many people so far do we have on a list that would be ready to go into an academy? Do we know yet?
When we were preparing for a possible class right now, we believe we had about 25 that we could get fairly quick. And quick could mean within probably 6 weeks is a good guess.
So what would then, and I knowing, Brian, his heart and soul was this. He grew up in this environment, so he knows, the needs of the officers, and we all are all concerned. And I think that also you highlighted something else that's, very key, is that those people who become inmates, I don't know if we're allowed to call them inmates anymore, but
Incarcerated individuals is a new term.
I'm sorry. The fact is that we have to try to, one of their jobs is to help keep these incarcerated individuals safe from violent people, okay? And like it or not, some of those people that are incarcerated happen to be younger people from our neighborhoods, kids that we know. And I would not want them, because I've had calls over the years from parents whose children were there. And I know they were over 18, but still it was their child. And, making calls, trying to get things done for them, to protect them, put them here, whatever. And so there's a sense of urgency, and a concern on the part of parents. And I myself, as being a parent, I sort of take that on myself. So, so now with this new halt, it's going to get worse, for them. So probably the only defense that we have is to be able to provide more correction officers to be in the jail, so that there is, if you can't physically put them in a different building or a different wing, a different floor, then at least have maybe a certain number of correction officers that could sort of be that wall, so to speak, to protect those that are not as bad as maybe some of the worst that are there. So right now, what is the factor that would keep you from saying in 6 weeks we have a class, we're swearing in a class?
So the difficulties I have now, again, as I go back to this in-service training, if I have that class, we got to stop in-service training, which we were mandated to do certain amount of mental health staff training before a certain date. That's going to be postponed, which will pass the due date. So we can do it. We get the approval and we're told we got to do 25. We can get that in there right away. The issue that we have with the HALT bill coming up, this is all new to everybody, but there are avenues besides staffing that we can do to start helping with protection of the staff and creating better behaviors. There's two things that are done nationally with the violent offenders, and this isn't here, this is all nationally. There's two programs that are considered as evidence-based that can help reduce incidents, violent behaviors, and change those actual behaviors. One of them, if you know any clinicians, one of the biggest ones in the country is called MRT, Moral Recognition Therapy. Another one is called, it's a Hustle 2.0. Both of these have been identified as Department of Justice as the #1 possibility of changing behaviors of those that are the most violent. We're already looking into how we can do this with those offenders in our population that are considered the behavior management units with the change of the HALT bill, and how we can introduce these tablets that you said as incentives for behavior and intelligence, because it works both ways with these tablets. My thought on this HALT bill is we're gonna utilize these tablets, which I call program devices. We're gonna use them so that inmates have a value of those. That there's actually a reason why an offender does not want to lose these tablets. We'll use it as corrective behaviors. So what inmates, again, incarcerated individuals look at is they do not want to lose things that they want. And that's like everyone's behavior. So if we have these program devices and they do things on those devices that incarcerated individuals will have a problem with losing, I'm going to use that as corrective behaviors for them, for incentives or disincentives for their behavior that they do. These other programs like the MRT, we have a meeting on the 14th of this month for companies that do this on the tablets, how you can do that, and that changes behavior. So I'm hoping that this is going to be other avenues we can do if we don't have more staffing to open up additional housing. This might be able to replace that.
So when we look at correction offices, we're short-staffed, and all of a sudden you have like an influx of inmates that come in. So like you had testified that almost on a daily basis, somebody is forced to work 16 hours rather than their normal 8-hour tour, which is acceptable by the State Department of Labor and
Yes.
OSHA, I guess.
Yes.
Okay. So those that give the training for the in-house training, are they the same individuals that will then go into the academy and train prospective candidates for in the academy?
So yes and no. So we have a identified academy staff, which I believe is 5. Those are permanently assigned to the academy that will do it. We also have identified up to 20 additional staff that work in regular assignments during the day that have been trained to train. So they get pulled from their areas. If we have a class of 50, like I said, I would be pulling more officers off the line that are trained to train, pull them off, and they will be able to produce and do the training.
But so is it possible, like say we say in the next 6 weeks, they do the all of these staff people would then do the mandated in-house training, that even if they have to do it, if they have to work sometimes 16 hours a day, I'm not forcing it on them, I know, I'm not, but we're in a dire situation. We're looking at something that is not going to be sustainable, and we need to start taking drastic measures for this. So if you had, for the next 6 weeks, if some of the people could step up the in-house training to get a little bit ahead of it, and then we could then start the class in 6 weeks. We can get 25, hopefully even 30 people that then could be correction officers, get them start so that they go through the academy. And even if they had to teach the academy class during the day, but if they had to go and do 3 or 4 hours afterwards to do in-house training to fulfill a mandate, I think that might be something that can be doable. I mean, I know that I was a big person on overtime. I'll admit that. So I hate to always say this, but if we're making correction officers who have 25 to 30 years on the job, telling them, you're not, after 8 hours, no, you're not going home. You got to wait. And I know, because I know people who work there, that sometimes even they do work more than 16 hours, okay? Because of, if people, COVID, or if correction officers, if all of a sudden you have a correction officer that gets hurt, then that person has to go to the hospital, then you need somebody there. When we're looking at HALT, I mean, we're talking then about, and I think it's great with, this, you're going to then have to hire people to administer the new programs, for, I guess, these clinicians, whatever they are, to oversee these iPad, iTablet, whatever. So, but I really think that we honestly have to take a look at this and say that we have to do whatever we have to do to get that class started in 6 weeks, because then, and then we're going to look at civil service, okay? Because it seems to be, out of all of the departments that I speak with and everybody who talks about any roadblocks that they face, for some odd reason, it's civil service, that when they finally get the okay to hire people, the drag time is civil service. So, Brian, I'm not telling them how they should run the jail, but I really think that this is critical. It really and truly is. So I'm hoping that the administration is listening and realizing that this is something that's very important, that we need to take a look at this. And for me, then I would like to know from them, I mean, and I know your heart is in the right place, and I'm not going to put you on the spot, but I will put this administration on the spot saying, then give me a good reason why you do not think that a class can start in 6 weeks. Because I think it's unfair to those that are already incarcerated. I think it's totally unfair to our correction officers that are already there. And I think it's unfair to you and your staff, because I think you really, truly are trying to do your best. Because I saw the improvements when I did that visit. I visibly saw these improvements. So I think that you are trying, but I think it's now time for all of us to say, you know what, we're going to join you on this, and let's all work together. That's all I'm saying.
Legislative Ford, if I could just add to that, I'm sorry. The one thing that we need to do here, and we need to do a much better job of in this county, is recruitment. And as of now, to my knowledge, there is no next correction officer test that's scheduled. To my knowledge, we just finished up a list and broke into the next list, but there's not even 1,000 people on that list. I hate to say this, 34 years ago, I took the test for this job with about 15,000 people. When over the last 5-6 years, there's no real recruitment process, there's no advertising process. We've given tests where there's 500, 600, 700 people taking these tests, maybe 1,000 people take the tests. And when you start wading through them with medicals, psychs, backgrounds, and all of that, you're lucky to get 50 or 100 viable candidates out of 750 people that took a test. So we need to get another test scheduled, because they're already broken into this last one that's there. And we need to do a much better job in recruitment.
And we could really look to diversify. I mean, when you look at the blending that's happening in Nassau County to a certain degree, there's so many opportunities, and I think that it sends a message to a lot of people, to a lot of young residents, that when we stress the importance of we have this Boost Nassau program, we have this to help small businesses. We want them to hire people. We want them to promise, give futures to people. And what are we doing? We're doing nothing, okay? We're, not even to have a test. I mean, let's schedule that test. Let's get the 6-week class in. Let's get it, within 6 weeks, I'm sure you could come up with some sort of a test, or however you do it for recruitment. And let's really be vibrant about it, because let's send a message to the residents in Nassau County that we believe in them. We believe that their children can be the next class of correction officers and people that can be contributing members to our communities.
This job was a great job when I took it, and it's still a great job now. The problem we have a lot with the recruitment and retention is all the stuff that's going on in the world, the anti-law enforcement sentiment, everything else, the bail reform. People see this and they think, why do I want to work in an environment like that? Listen, this job's been great to me over the last 33 years, and I'd recommend it to people. I tell people that they're going to do it, but we have to change the overall scope of things here so people would be interested in doing jobs like this.
And I think on a new recruitment level, we can do that, really throw a positive spin on it. And when you talk about, the new ideas that they have, they're very violent criminals and whatever. But I really think, and I agree with you, I think the message has to be sent, because I have friends and relatives that work they're under your care, sir. So, but I would like to see, and I could think of a number of younger people, young men and young women that probably would love to have this job, and I think they would do great at it, So I'm hoping that, I could get a consensus with everybody sitting up here with me, that I think that is something that we really have to push. And I'm not going to ask Katie to come up and speak, but I do hope, Katie, that you are listening, and you understand that this is urgency, and I'm not letting it go, okay? So, Brian, I'm with you on this one, okay? And thank you, sir. I appreciate all that you've done so far. And you too, Brian. Okay.
Legislator Ferretti.
Hello, Brian. Thank you for your presentation. You always seem to educate me in some aspect, although that might not be a good thing, because it keeps me up at night, usually, from what I learn from you. But you mentioned some things in your presentation that I was listening to, but I didn't actually get to take down some of the numbers, so maybe you can educate me again. You indicated that before bail reform, the inmate number, the head count was at what number?
It was over 1,000, about close to 1,100.
Okay. Sheriff, do you have the exact number, or?
No, the last thing I did see was 1083, and I think that was November of 2019. But we can get those exact numbers, but
right.
it is pretty close to what Brian
And
said.
then in the beginning, the first quarter of 2020, what was the inmate head count?
So what I can give you that I know is a fact was in August of 2020 was our very low that the agency has ever had, was 557. As of today, our numbers, and what you got to be careful of is what do you mean by our count population? I talk about our in-house, which those that are at the correctional center and NUMC or the outside hospital. I'm not talking about the ones that are in Suffolk County that we send or Westchester, because we do have other incarcerated that are outside of our facility. I'm talking about just the ones that are physically on my in-house count. 557 in August 2020. Today was 753.
So you knew my next question.
Yeah.
All right. Now, Brian, since you brought it up, so you had between November of 2019 and August of 2020 a reduction of roughly 50%.
Yeah.
It was cut in half.
Yes. Yeah.
And that
At the height of COVID.
And that was okay. Was that because of COVID, or was it because of bail reform, or something else?
It was a combination of both.
Okay.
The main thing was about 300 plus inmates that we lost because of bail reform. They were dribbled out of the facility the last couple of weeks, right before bail reform went in, because nobody wanted to see 300 inmates walking up Carmen Avenue at the same time on January 1st when bail reform took effect. So they were dribbled out over the last 2 weeks or so. But then when COVID hit, we lost another 300.
What were some of the offenses that those 300 or so were charged with that were released?
No, everything soup to nuts. Especially after bail reform, they were not keeping. You know, I'm on the record many times saying this, that before bail reform, many of the people that were being released were in for heinous crimes, heavy-duty drug charges. There was sex crimes. There were assaults, gun charges, manslaughter, things like that. After bail reform, when those what they considered to be low-level nonviolent crimes, and I'll be damned if they're nonviolent crimes, but they're described that way in the penal law, we're keeping pretty much the worst of the worst.
When you say nonviolent crimes, what about robbery? Was that considered nonviolent?
Armed robbery, right?
Was that considered nonviolent?
Yes, under the certain aspects of it, certain levels of it.
How about burglary?
Burglary was definitely on the list.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep.
Anyone else? Okay. Thank you, Sheriff. Thank you, Brian.
Welcome. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, legislators.